Hello and welcome to the, what month is it? February General Meeting of the League of Women Voters of Champaign County. Today we will be talking about a campaign to increase voter registration and voter turnout with some ideas that came from the Dade County League of Women Voters in Wisconsin. And our guests for today are members of this organization and members of a few other local organizations. Linda Bair, James Manrique, and Ann Prisland. And they're going to talk about their proposal, and then we'll have a round of questions.
Is this good? Good? Okay. First, I want to introduce us a little bit more and talk about, we've all been active in the 2018 elections last fall and throughout the year. We're fairly new, I think, most of us, we haven't been in those activities for decades, but we fairly gotten engaged in 2016. Ann is an election judge, deputy registrar, and member of Solidarity Sundays. James runs the Champaign County Voter Alliance site, which is votechampaign.org. Yes. Yep. And it's a very interesting, informative, nonpartisan site with a lot of information on voter engagement and turnout. I encourage you to take a look at it. I'm a member of CU Progressives and also a volunteer with James and Ann in other kinds of voter registration events. So that's who we are. Most important, maybe, we're all league members fairly recently, so yay, League of Women Voters. And we were all involved in the midterm elections as volunteers. So as we got finished with that, like everybody else, after that election was over, we started saying, what next? What's going to happen? We came to the conclusion, we started talking, we came to the conclusion that we should take what we've learned in 2018 and see if we can't build on that to continue expanding voter engagement and voter turnout in Champaign County. What did we learn? Can we do better? So we decided we created an idea, which we're calling Vote Connect, to expand voter engagement in Champaign County. We see this as an opportunity to build on what we've done before. However, I want to make a special note because this is a League of Women Voters group. In this presentation, we're going to talk, as Holly mentioned, about a League of Women Voters group in Madison, Wisconsin that's done some very interesting things, and we'll be talking about that. But as we do, you might be thinking, wait, that's a League of Women Voters. What's the relationship between what we're presenting and this league, our league? Well, the answer is that it's to be determined. It's not set yet. We see a great lot of overlap of mission and a possibility for different kinds of involvement, and we'll talk about some of those. We're actually here and interested in hearing your ideas about that. So I just wanted to let you know, it's not like something is set in the background. This is an idea that we're giving for your consideration. Can you move for me? Mm-hmm. Okie doke. So these are I have four main topics. We'll try to zip through these fairly quickly. We want to make a case for a new kind of initiative in Champaign County. It's going to be fairly quick, but not to worry. We have the slides and our notes will be online on our website. So if you care to see this, more information, you don't need to take notes or worry about getting it. I think that's what I have for now. James is now going to talk about, our four topics are what happened in the 2018 election, our proposal, I'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit about the Madison, Wisconsin model, and then we'll talk about how it might work here. Is that clear? Everybody copacetic? We're going to go fast.
All right.
All right, James.
So I'll talk a little bit about the stats from 2018. This last midterm election was pretty fantastic. For the county, compared to the last midterm of 2014. Oh, yeah. Well, it was the whole county put in so much effort. Across the board, voter turnout was higher in basically every single precinct except one. From the last midterm, there was 55,000 ballots cast, which is pretty average for a midterm in Champaign County. 55,000 was actually on the high end for the average for Champaign County. And then in 2018, they had over 80,000 ballots cast. So that's a 25,000 ballot increase from the previous highest in the county. So they really broke a lot of records with this last midterm election. So that was absolutely fantastic. But not just that, the students also had an almost bigger improvement than the county in general. Typically, student voter turnout is one of the lowest turnout demographics of anything. And in the last midterm, that was echoed with 1,600 ballots cast on the campus precincts. This last midterm in 2018, there was 8,800 ballots cast. That's 5.5 times as many as the last one. And it's 4 times as many as their average. So the students really just shattered all records. It was absolutely fantastic. And that was done through just a lot of hardworking volunteers. So some observations from the 2018 midterm was that there was a lot of first-time volunteers that were participating. A lot of people that were interested in politics for the first time were starting to volunteer in different local groups. With that, there was a lot of high enthusiasm. A lot of people were really committed to their different causes. There was a lot of diverse different backgrounds, people from all sorts of different backgrounds and causes that they liked or that they wanted to support. There was different grassroots efforts around each of those. And so, yeah, they worked with candidates and issues. But then in addition, there were some possible missed opportunities. Sometimes there was so much stuff going on that it was hard to know exactly what the other groups were doing. That led to some duplication of materials and efforts. Sometimes even at the same event, you would have different people registering voters from different groups when really you only need one group to do it. I mean, there's not that many new voters to register. So there was duplications of effort, duplications of material. Then there was also information gaps. There was a lot of information out there, so sometimes it was hard to find thorough quality information about how to register voters, questions that might come up, stuff like that. So there was a little bit of an information gap. So those are different ways that we could improve on 2018. Did I cover that?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, did that match your experience? Did you guys know anybody that was, or I guess a show of hands.
Show of hands, yeah.
Did anybody know a first-time volunteer that volunteered for the first time?
Was one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I guess what were some other show of hands?
Did you see gaps in the kind James mentioned?
Duplications of efforts? Or,
anybody?
Yeah.
We saw some.
Definitely.
Yeah. Did you see some places where people needed information and then they weren't quite sure where to get it? They were questions of fact?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah. So that matches a lot of what we were seeing during that election.
So as we look at that, the natural question is, can we do better? We did good. James was just giving us the data. We did good. We did great. But can we do better? Yes, we think we can do better, and we'll tell you why in a minute. But here's basically our proposal: to start a nonpartisan, volunteer-led initiative that builds on this energy. We had a lot of energy. Let's build on it. Let's not let it dissipate. And let's improve voter engagement in Champaign County. And if you'll notice the key words, did I get that? I can't quite, there we go. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Just notice the key words. This is what we want you to take away about Vote Connect. Nonpartisan, volunteer-led, volunteer energy, focusing on helping volunteers help other people, and improving voter engagement of all kinds. And it's a local effort. And so the question might be, and this is what we mean by voter engagement, is voter awareness, education, registration, and turnout. So when we say voter engagement, that's a big term, but we mean all of those activities that all of us did in the 2018 election and probably earlier. So how would it work? Ann is going to talk about why we think this might work.
Thanks, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to share now with you are some of the details about the effort in Madison, Wisconsin. The most important thing to look at is the number on the screen right now.
Yeah, 90,
Wow.
90
Take a minute. Woo, wow. Yay, Madison.
The city of Madison has approximately 156,000 registered voters. 145,510 came to the polls, plus those who came and registered on election day itself. So how did this happen? I was very interested in this, partly because I have a friend who's been heavily engaged in these efforts in Madison. So I called her up and said, how did you do it? She asked me, or suggested I contact two very important groups, and I did. I'm going to share with you some of the information I learned about Madison now, and I'd be glad to answer any questions after we're done with the presentation, if you want to know any more of the
Are
details.
you ready for the two groups?
So here are the two groups. The Madison City Clerk, who is responsible for running the elections in the city of Madison, and the Dane County League of Women Voters. The Dane County League is very active in the city and throughout the rest of Dane County, which actually is very similar to Champaign County, with a largely urban university population in Madison and a largely rural remainder of Dane County. So it's very similar to ours. What happened with these two groups is they have a long-term partnership of coordination in an ongoing collaboration to provide training to volunteers, to provide online and paper resources, to coordinate planning between them, and to create a wide variety of voter registration and education efforts. And they work primarily through volunteers. And the volunteers in Madison are called Voter Education Ambassadors. Cool name, eh? Okay, so how does it work? The first thing is the Madison City Clerk provides the initial training for the Voter Education Ambassadors. That's intentional, because we know that any training needs to be accurate and correct based on state law and election procedures. Wisconsin has a much more comprehensive and stringent approach to voting than we do in Illinois. The laws are extensive, and you have to do everything exactly right to make sure that voters actually get to cast their ballots. So the city clerk takes the responsibility for making sure that initial training is accurate and appropriate to the state laws. Every volunteer who goes through the training, and by the way, anybody can volunteer and become an ambassador. That includes people who are involved in partisan organizations, people who are involved in promoting causes of various kinds. But when they operate as ambassadors, they operate in a nonpartisan way. That's part of the agreement. When they go through the training, they receive a kit that includes all kinds of materials that they may want to use. Reference materials, resources, handouts of all kinds. When I asked my friend to go through her kit, she said, just a minute, and I heard this long pause, and she said, I found it. It's about this big, because she's been doing it for several years. But these are provided to all the ambassadors to make use of when they go out and do their work. The city clerk schedules voter registration and education events, and volunteers sign up online to participate. So what's the role of the Dane County League in all of this, part of the partnership? They provide additional training and resources that are geared to specific kinds of voter registration that the Dane County League takes responsibility for. They also collaborate with the city clerk to schedule events with the whole goal of avoiding duplication and making sure that no one in the community gets left out. That includes Madison's major employers. It includes all the educational institutions, food pantries, libraries, homeless shelters, neighborhoods. Anywhere, anytime, any place is their motto. So this synergy works extremely well, as you can imagine. Next slide. What I wanted to do is to show you some of the ways that the Dane County League works in terms of how they participate in this effort. So we focused on their online resource center for volunteers that's called the Voter Service Central. And that's going to be our focus for today. As you can see, everything's online, and that's true with the city clerk as well. Both groups maximize the use of online resources to make it easy for people to find, to use, to share on their own time, which makes really good sense for me. So let's take a look at some of the specifics on the resources. I hope you can see some of the detail, but let me go through it a little bit. This is a list on the right-hand side of the kinds of materials that you can find on the League of Women Voters website. There are PowerPoint presentations for all of the trainings that the League has created. As I mentioned, the ambassadors first go through the city clerk's training. The League then has a follow-up training, which is everything you really wanted to know to be good at voter registration. And they provide that plus a variety of specialized trainings. Everything's online, including all kinds of role-play scripts and other opportunities where you can see people actually registering voters in video to get the idea of how the whole thing works. Volunteers can use these resources at any time. And next. Both the city clerk and the League identify their primary initiatives that they're going to take responsibility for. In the case of the League, they have identified primarily libraries, food pantries, senior citizen centers, and students. Each of these initiatives has a liaison who works with the different locations and is responsible for putting up a page on the website that talks about each of the events that is within that schedule. So for instance, if you wanted to volunteer to work at a food pantry, you would go to that page on the website, you would see when the events are happening, and you sign yourself up. And of course, there's a reminder that you need to have gone through training first. Sign-ups take place in a very easy way. Next. On the calendar. They have an interactive calendar of all the events that are hosted and sponsored through the League of Women Voters. And all you need to do is to find an event that you want to work on, click on that event, and sign up. Very simple. And the city clerk has exactly the same thing on her website as well for the events she's responsible for. A couple of interesting examples we thought you might want to know about. One is with the libraries. Madison has quite a number of public libraries, and of course the county does. In fact, I did look up the number of libraries in Champaign County, and I was surprised to learn there were quite a few more than I thought there were. So it's a good resource really in any county. The city clerk and the League work together to work with the libraries. Some libraries actually, through their staff, they receive a kit that gives them resources, and they actually hand out resources and registration material to volunteers. Other libraries provide space and tables. And the volunteers set up what they call check-out voting events, which are held at a regular basis in the libraries. And one thing the League has been responsible for, in the next slide, is a bookmark. Through funding through local community agencies, they've developed bookmarks that highlight the key elements that voters need to be aware of. Madison is actually had a primary later this month, so these bookmarks are already out and about in the libraries waiting for people to receive them. And next, of course, is the UW-Madison campus. Like, as James pointed out, the statistics for us here in Champaign-Urbana, Madison student turnout was also very high for the past midterm election. You see on the right, Linda has excerpted out the list of all of the kinds of resources that are available specifically for folks who are registering voters on the Madison campus. And I guess the last slide really is just to summarize that the Voter Service Central, which I encourage you all to take a look at so that you can get an idea of the breadth and depth of the resources available. I'm sure you can see by now why Madison is an inspiration for us. It's the partnership between the city clerk and the League and its coordination of volunteer work. And it's the fact of the careful planning, the efforts to avoid duplication, and to make sure that voter engagement happens throughout the city of Madison.
So now we want to talk a little bit, that's Madison, and there's a whole lot more that we had to weed out because they have done an enormous amount of work. And as Ann mentioned, you can go to this website, and we'll share the link with you again, And everything that we showed you is open. You can look at it. So you can explore if you want to be just inspired. Maybe not everything they did would work here, but it is inspiring and gives us some ideas of what's possible. And we may want to mention, they started this as far around 2015.
In 2015, the voter laws in Wisconsin changed, and that created an impetus for a more extensive effort in voter education and engagement. So this effort's been going on between the two groups very strongly since 2015.
And for all that they've done, to me, that seems like pretty fast to put on. There's a whole lot more that we haven't showed you. So let's talk just a couple of minutes about how this Madison model might work in Champaign County. We really see, this is not a plan. This is simply an idea of how we might stage this growth if the community decided to do a Vote Connect kind of effort. And we see it in two stages. One is by April 2nd, because all of us are focused now on what we need to get done for the municipal elections on April 2nd. What can we get done by then? Well, we can launch an initial website to share information. We've started developing, mainly Ann, but James and I may kick in soon, developing a lot of handouts and posting them on the website. We want to be useful. So our first goal is, between now and April, be useful to the volunteers that are out there doing what they do so well. The second thing that we three will be doing is continuing to do this, making presentations to groups, meeting with individual community leaders, meeting with anybody to talk about what ideas can you give us? Would this work? What should we keep in mind? How might we structure something like this? We're gathering ideas. We're in an exploration stage. Oops, pardon me. Then the second stage would be after the April election, leading up to 2020, would be to see if we could not put some of this structure in place. Whatever's agreed upon, let's do it. Let's create some voter ambassadors. Let's get them trained. Let's start providing services and support. Let's take our initial website, which we're going to show you, which is very beginning, it's a baby thing, and make it something more sophisticated and of more service to volunteers, because the technology holds it together. If you have a volunteer-led initiative, you need technology to supplement your efforts. So that's part of what the reason is for that. Thank you. But one thing just to say, this is just our idea. This could go in many different directions. What you're seeing is a very high-level view of what might be possible. The community might say, let's go this way or that way, and we'll find that out between now and April. So, next slide. Whoops, there we go. So from a high level, these are just our ideas based on our Ann's extensive conversations with Madison and reading a bit. What are the necessary pieces in Champaign County to make something like this work? And it's going to look very familiar because we've been inspired by Madison. Voter education ambassadors. We think voter education ambassadors in Champaign County could be trained by the county clerk's office. The little heart there is there to indicate they are the heart of this, okay? They are the most important piece where we need to keep our laser focus. The Champaign County Clerk's Office, they are the authority, just as the city clerk is in Madison. We need to have them on board in order to say what you're doing is correct, here's the initial training, and so forth. The leadership team, we envision a small leadership team initially to do coordination and developing of materials and so forth, but how many, how it would work, how it would be structured, none of those things are determined yet. Basically, you're looking at the initial group, but we understand that this may grow and change over time. The fourth piece, the necessary pillar to our ambassadors, county clerk is critical, leadership team is critical, online resource center. We have to do this to make a volunteer effort feasible. So let's take a look. Is that okay? You going too fast? No? Okay. Let's look at the voter education ambassador role. I just want to talk about what that is. To some extent, we are already voter education ambassadors. Here's part of what that role is: to focus on voter engagement, voter registration, voter turnout. Aren't we doing that already? Yes. Help voters with questions. Give them rides. Our focus is helping voters, okay? Third, we volunteer anywhere and everywhere. We're already voter education ambassadors, you could argue. But what's different? What are we proposing that is different from what we are doing now? First, some extended training by the county clerk's office, and some standard training basically, to indicate that this is what a voter education ambassador needs to know before you hit the streets wearing that label. Tools, support. We think that there's a place for taking voter education ambassadors. As Ann mentioned, they get training and then they get support. What kind of support? We love the idea of toolkit, and we're sort of mentally already constructing a Champaign County toolkit that you might get after training, and we're putting some of that stuff on the website. Online Resource Center is another kind of support. So do you see the pattern here? Train folks, support them with tools and online resources, and then continue talking with them and supporting them. The other key piece, what might be different than some of what we're doing now, is to offer help nonpartisan. This is complementary to things that partisan folks might be doing. In fact, we believe that a lot of the resources we're developing will be very useful to anybody who's going out even canvassing for a candidate. So it's not that there's a hard wall, though. If you are in the role of voter education ambassador, to be determined, right, you're nonpartisan. But it does not mean that we're excluding, we're complementary. So we're trying to work within, we're trying to strengthen. We think there's a role for a central space. Here's partisan, here's parties, here's so forth. There's a central space where civic infrastructure lives. That's where the league is, right? You're civic, you're nonpartisan, you're in the middle. We want to strengthen that middle. Okay? All right, what else we got? Partnership, supporting the ambassadors. As we mentioned earlier, there's a list of the roles for the county clerk, which is guidelines, training, and they coordinate with the leadership team. Leadership team tries to get some voter ambassadors, bring them in, maintain the registration events, encourage networking, and as I mentioned before, the leadership team is to be developed. So this is how it fits together. You're seeing the beginning of an organizational chart here. County clerk's office and leadership team, we coordinate together, and we both support the ambassadors. And they're our heart again. Put it together with the public, we're all supporting the public. So this is very high level, but it is how we think it might initially work in Champaign County.
And we should note that we've talked to Aaron Ammons, the new county clerk, and he is supportive of this.
Oh, thank you. That was on my,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we started talking with his staff too.
Yes.
So obviously they are very busy right now, and we understand that, but we are going to keep working on the relationship. James is going to talk a little bit about what we're doing now.
So at the moment, we're working on starting that website, the beginnings of the website. We're putting it together. We do have some basic resources up there at the moment. I think there's actually an article about like connecting local elections with issues and like why vote, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a couple basic things up there already. The website is voteconnect.org. Let's see, we're developing and sharing resources for the April election, and we're continuing to gather ideas from different community groups. And then I guess for updates for it, we can either be reached by email or also on the website. We also have the clipboards for the signups in the back.
If you want to, we're starting an email list.
Yeah. And then I guess that pretty much wraps it up. And then so now we're ready for people's thoughts and where they see this idea fitting with the Champaign County League, Champaign County in general, potential challenges that we might face or ways that we could possibly improve it.
Or suggestions for other kinds of activities to do. And we'd also like to show you our website, which is still a baby, but yeah, Barbara.
I really like this. It's exciting. One of the things I ran into in the election was a misunderstanding or a not understanding of what canvassing is and what voter education is, where people were signing up, they were registering people to vote plus handing out brochures for particular candidates. And I'm hoping that this will help straighten that out, because I'd always thought that those two functions should be divided, and they definitely were not divided in all cases.
Okay.
So I applaud any efforts you could make to do that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Good idea.
Absolutely.
Other comments? While we're doing, you want to do the,
Oh, the website? Yeah.
Well, other comments or questions? Does this seem like it might work? Or are we doomed? Are we utopian and we'll never make it, given this county?
Teresa?
I'm just curious the kind of woman power, manpower that you know is behind this in Bain County.
I'd be happy to
That's a good
answer
question.
that, because I asked those same questions, both of the city clerk and the Dane County League. And what tends to happen is people funnel in either way. They either go to the league first or they go to the city clerk first, and then start working for both, just as my friend Jean did. I asked the city clerk, she said they have now about 1,000 voter education ambassadors.
Yeah.
Now, that's been developed since about 2011 was when she started her efforts. Many of those people also work through the league, because that's where they get their support training and this huge variety of resources that you see online. So it's hard to tease out unique numbers. The folks in the league told me that while they don't require volunteers to become members of the league, a lot of people just go through the training because they want the information. Their membership has increased as well. And they can't credit it totally to this effort, but it certainly has played a part. So yeah, there are a lot of volunteers that have been developed over time in Madison, but when you think about the volunteers who were engaged in last fall's election, there were a bunch in our county as well. So, but those numbers are good for Madison, don't you think? And that's one of the reasons why you saw that voter turnout number as high as it was.
Which is kind of comforting. If you apply resources, the number will go up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Other comments?
So I'm going to ask a question as I walk over there. Obviously, voter registration in Illinois is very different from voter registration in Madison, and voters have many opportunities to register. How would you see that changing the focus of what we might want to do?
What I would say is when I talked to the folks in Madison and then explained how voter registration and what the voting requirements are in Illinois, they said, oh my gosh, how much easier. And so their idea is that it may not require the same amount of training, for example, that is required for ambassadors in the state of Wisconsin, or in the Madison area. And so I think that would be true. What I do see happening is that people who are trained here would have the same information. Because one of the things that happened is that people, even with the best intentions, were giving out different kinds of information about where you can go to early vote, about do you have to vote at your precinct, must you bring an ID, oh, how about that voter information card, that works, doesn't it? Well, actually, no. But so the information was not very consistent. So I would see one of the efforts is to make sure that anybody who wants to register or work on voter education has the same consistent information. So I think that's one of the areas of focus, Holly, to answer your question.
And some of the data that James particularly has been collecting about where voter turnout is strong or weak might lead us to focus intensely on turnout, or intensely here, even though registration is easy here and we're doing pretty good, there might be pockets, geographic pockets or community pockets that we're not reaching. So I would see us using data to focus our efforts more specifically.
Well, and that's the nice thing about the Madison model was that, as you'd seen on their website, for their different target demographics, they have different resources. So like for the student target demographics, there was a whole set of resources for that. For the food pantry stuff, there was different resources for that, because sometimes those different demographics have different questions or just different ways that you might approach that demographic to either help get them registered or help encourage their turnout. So like maybe one demographic might have, like, for students, for instance, they change their address a lot. So a big thing for students is just making sure, have you verified that your address is updated? How do you update that? So like that's a big thing for students, but that might not be such a big thing for somebody that just has lived in town for a long time. So you change the approach for the different groups.
And building on what you just were talking about, outreach to high school students who are newly eligible to vote. It seems to me this is going to be a piece of it that would take time to develop. I mean, I don't have kids and I don't have that connection, so I'm not volunteering to be headed up.
We're
But
writing your name
no, it's
down.
an idea that came to me from somebody else, and I tried to work it up and have some ideas about what does not work. But to have it to involve students in the schools in
Absolutely.
doing some of this
Absolutely.
would be the best way.
And you know, if we asked ourselves the question, just how are we doing on food pantries in this community? How are we doing on library access? How are we doing on high schools? I don't know. It may be that there's a need first for some research as to who's working in what areas and how are they doing. We may need to do a period of finding out where we're at before we decide where to put our efforts.
I had another question. Our son lives in Madison and has been voting since he was 18, a student there, and is now 33. So in the midst of all of this, a few years ago, he got caught in one of Governor Walker's attempts to suppress the vote. And I won't go into it, but it's interesting because he sat there in the city clerk's office until it was resolved. But my question is, does this program deal with voter suppression issues and to educate people about how to persist or how to report it?
In as much as that's a voter turnout question, I think that is definitely could be on the table. We haven't talked about that, but thank you. That's why we want to present to groups like this, because we keep getting ideas about what's an issue in our community. Another thing is people with a history of felony. People who, there's a whole area there. I could ask the same question. How are we doing on voter registration? Not to critique any effort, but to say, I just don't know.
One of my friends ran into that in Champaign, a woman who had a felony and didn't know she could vote.
That's
and
right.
She registered.
It-
So,
that is a very common thing. I've
Yep.
seen at other events at some community groups that weren't necessarily connected to voter outreach. They had the impression that felons couldn't vote, and so that's one of those common myths that is something that we would be working to get that information out there. And I mean, if we were doing like a target demographic group, we could do like voter registration drives at the county jail or something, or at the county courthouse or something like that, to be like, hey, did you know you can vote?
And
And-
actually, on that, I did talk with the folks at our county clerk's office about in the jails. And as you all know, as you all probably know, if you're in jail but not yet convicted of a crime, yes, indeed, you can vote. And there is information posted in the jail, and the county clerk has liaisons who work in the jail who make sure that people who are there have that information. May I piggyback on something Barb said about the ID issues in the state of Wisconsin? One of the things that has made that effort very successful there is the coalition of organizations that work to make sure that people know how to get an ID, what information they need to have to prove who they are. And as Barb said, it's a very long and complicated story. But the same thing, in my mind, would be true here. The strength of such an approach as we're describing is the fact that it's a coalition. It involves lots and lots of community organizations so that the information can be shared widely among a variety of community organizations and groups. It's not just a group taking responsibility for everything, and that would be our hope, I think.
Nor is it the three of us trying to do
No.
everything, because there's a lot of potential in this community. For example, the high school issue. There are already people working on that. Can we learn from them, support them? So you can envision sort of Vote Connect having some satellite projects which are coordinated with, so we're sharing information, reducing duplication, and letting the rest of the community know what these wonderful folks are doing. So there's a lot of potential for networking within this framework as well, of good work that's already going on.
Other questions?
So when you showed your plan for the next election and then the 2020 election, I think you'll probably want to punctuate it with doing something around the primary season, because there'll be an awful lot of energy then, and that's important. And a lot of folks in this community don't understand that you are not actually a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. You just pick up the ballot you want. So there's a lot of education around that people need to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Questions?
Yes, very good point.
Well, and the primary is a great target for increasing voter turnout, because the primaries historically have very low voter turnout, as low typically as municipal elections. Typically for a primary election, voter turnout is around 20% or so. And so that means that there's a lot of room to improve that.
Yep, got it down.
What's on the screen now should be, I hope, our website, which is, again, it's just an initial thing. It's not meant to be the final one. It will take some significant effort and focusing of our mission to do the final online resource center. But we do have some information on, here's some volunteer resources over here on the left. In the middle is some information we're starting to gather about the municipal election. Here are, if you want to keep up with what we're doing, here's our updates. Here's our presentation is under this link here, this little blue guy. And then here is just news posts where we will have news items about things that are
For
happening.
example, this very meeting.
Is here. Yes. Presentation on Vote Connect. Posted that, last night maybe? And Champaign County, James's organization, Champaign County Voter Alliance, is having a meeting. Candidate forums, gee, whose are those? This league. And so we have a great bit of detail on when and who and what hours and who's showing up on this. So it's this news. The county clerk is now posting on Twitter, and we'll have some thought pieces on why vote and how does that relate to this brand new wonderful handout, which is ANDed, which I just love. You might want to take a look at why vote. Because a lot of times you meet people who could vote, they just say, I'm not sure why I should vote.
Especially in a municipal election,
Especially in
right?
municipals. So encourage you to go to voteconnect.org and take a look. It is going through growing pains. We may be changing it, but we will try to, everything that we're doing, we will try to pour out there so you can keep track if you want. Or email list, if you will have an email list periodically. It's not going to be every week, folks. Barb?
I understand, and I appreciate the groundwork that you've been doing to get this proposal in good shape, that you're reaching out to a lot of the constituencies that are normally involved with elections, and trying to build on the success from the 2018 election. I guess my question is, how will you know when there is that critical mass of support for this proposal that would say to you and any other group interested, the county clerk, maybe the League of Women Voters, that there's some solid support in Champaign County for this to happen, that planning for 2020 is critical, and that the coalition that you're hoping to achieve is achieved?
I woke up last night thinking about that. How do we know when we've achieved liftoff, basically? When do we get liftoff? We haven't talked about that. I suppose we think we'll know it when we see it, but we probably need to develop some criteria, you guys, for doing it. So do you have any thoughts, Barb? How would we know? Is one organization sufficient? Is 5 too many? I think we'll start seeing some synergy when people start saying, "Vote Connect. Oh, I heard about that. Can I use that?" If people start saying that as we go around town, I think to me that would be one sign of success. And we'll have some stats on the website too. But I think it's just going to be a subjective thing, unless somebody can advise us differently. You guys have any other thoughts on that?
Well, we're already moving forward with a lot of different plans. Like, we've been talking with the county clerk, and we've been developing different resources already. So, I mean, if it's like a question of like when the project in general is going to launch, I mean, probably by 2020, I would assume, because we're building all the resources now, making the connections now, and then hopefully we'll have something, you know, up and running by then.
But remember our intermediate goal, be useful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're willing to put in a significant amount of time as long as we're being useful to the volunteer community now. And at some point, I think we'll get enough feedback from the community that will kind of tell us what you asked. I hope. Teresa?
My question is just about organizations, like partner organizations. I'm sitting here thinking like the Farm Bureau, the Rotary Clubs. I mean, is that the kind of organization you're thinking about, or something more nonpartisan politically?
Those were actually on our list of the very ones you mentioned. We want to make sure that every organization in Champaign County knows about this, knows about Vote Connect, and is aware of the resources that they can use within their own members. And once we get training up and running for voter education ambassadors, that any member of the Farm Bureau or the Rotary Club or the Sierra Club or the NAACP can participate.
So, and then also in terms of like direct collaborations, we would directly collaborate with nonpartisan organizations that are like strictly nonpartisan. But then we've also been talking a lot about, you know, organizations that are not exactly partisan, but, you know, have very heavy leanings one way or the other, and how to handle those specific organizations. And then for organizations that are very clearly partisan, the training is still available and the resources are still available. But then, as Linda was saying earlier, if somebody is doing a voter ambassador role, like if they're actively a voter ambassador, they need to be nonpartisan at that, you know, at that event when they're doing that sort of thing. But that doesn't prohibit like an organization sending all their members to get the training, just so that everybody's on the same page and has the same, you know, information.
So it's complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
But on the other hand, this is a complicated county.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've learned in the last year is how networked everybody is. There's a ton of fairly small groups, and it's like this, a lot of big circles, and this person might be on these three, and this person might be on those four. It's a highly networked community. And so we're going to struggle with how best to do our outreach. And so that's part of what we have to work out.
This is just a geographical question, because my daughter lives in Madison, but I don't know this. Is Madison, the city of Madison, contiguous with Dane County? Is that the same thing?
Dane County is bigger.
Okay.
Madison is in Dane County.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, Dane County encompasses quite a few smaller towns, rural areas, very similar geographic makeup to Champaign County as well. Madison, though, also is the state capital of Wisconsin, so that puts other dimensions into the mix in Madison. It's very much like Champaign-Urbana. Many ethnic groups are represented. A wide range of economic groups are represented.
It is a little unique in the fact that the Madison city clerk is separate than the Dane County city clerk, and the Madison
yeah.
runs their elections a little bit differently than Dane County in general.
Well, the Madison city clerk is an appointive role. The Dane County clerk is like our county clerk, is the election authority that certifies the elections. The Madison city clerk is kind of the administrator, responsible for the election machinery. But the certification of all elections, including Madison, is done by the Dane County clerk.
So is this feeling like, is this too much information? Guys, you were the first group to receive this presentation, so we'd appreciate now or later some feedback. Too much, too little, do something else?
I think you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I think we're on board. This is
We
what we
picked
do.
an easy start, yeah.
We're the League of Women Voters, preaching to the choir. We're here already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good point, good point.
And thank you for preaching to the choir. Choir. Come on, let's go, choir.
The choir needs a cheer up once in a while.
So Linda mentioned earlier that there's no decision made about just how the league's going to interface with this. And I'm hopeful that at our May annual meeting, when we workshop on what we want to do going forward, that's one of the topics is this group and their work and what we want to do that's in the same area and how closely we want to be tied. So far, the only steps we've really made is that obviously we've been talking to these folks a lot, and James has come and talked to the board, and we've talked about things like if they want to apply for grants and they fit within our specs, we'll co-sign on the grants, and because we have a 501c3 and they don't yet, so we can do some of that. But as far as how
For
firmly we will be hooked together later, that's really a matter for the membership to sort of figure out. So hopefully we'll workshop that. What do you all think about how closely these organizations
And
should?
do you want us to leave the room? No.
Yeah, just watch it on TV later. Do you have a thought, Jen?
Oh, I'm sold. I'm just going first class.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're all impressed by and we want to share in is your enthusiasm and energy, and to the extent that that's shareable, that's really something I think that we would really love to be engaged with. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions for our panel today? Do you have any more questions for us?
I'm talked out. Are you?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Feel free to stay in touch. If you have an idea in the middle of the night next week, send us an email. And we'd be happy to have any conversations with any other groups that you know about that you think this might be appropriate for, because that's our mission from now to April, is to reach out.
Okay. I want to thank our speakers, and I also have one more announcement real quick. I was contacted yesterday by Illinois Public Radio. They are putting together an event for the 14th of March. It'll be sort of a World Cafe style event. They're looking to get people together to talk about putting together a questionnaire of gun violence questions that we might want to take to the various city council and mayoral candidates. And I will get you more information about that when I have it, but they're interested in us participating and perhaps providing moderators to help out at the tables and then publicizing the results of the event. So I'll let you know more when I know more. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us present.